Hello students, welcome to Byju's IAS. Welcome to a session on economy this week, wherein we'll be taking up some of the very important articles that have appeared in various business related newspapers and we'll be analyzing these particular articles. For this particular video, I've chosen the time period from 23rd to 29th of November 2020 and the articles that I've chosen are from Business Line, Hindu, Business Standard, Indian Express, Live Mint and Financial Express. Let's begin the discussion. The first article is with respect to the proposal of Government of India to set up tax dispute resolution. Now, very recently, there has been a lot of discussion with respect to two very important issues which have been highlighted by the finance minister and which have been given in this particular article. The first is with respect to the tax dispute resolution. And the second item that has been discussed, or the second issue that has been discussed in this particular article, is with respect to advanced pricing agreements. That is APA. Now let me start with the first one, the tax dispute that is being discussed in the article. Now, with respect to idea for tax dispute, basically what happens is there are taxpayers and there is a tax authority. Now, whenever a taxpayer will file or will pay certain taxes to the government, the tax official or the tax authorities will look into it, and if the tax authorities feel that, or if they have a cause that there is a higher tax which is supposed to be paid by the taxpayer, they'll basically raise a demand with respect to this particular higher amount of a tax. And basically against this particular demand, the taxpayer will file a case or will file an appeal against this particular demand. This is basically referred to as a tax dispute. Now, in case of India, both under direct taxes as well as under indirect taxes, there are a lot of tax disputes. Now, these particular tax disputes or the cases related to tax disputes are said to be one of the primary reasons for clogging of judiciary, or in simple terms, one of the primary reasons why there is a very high number of cases which are pending in case of India is said to be the tax disputes. And there is also one more very important point. Various experts say that the major litigant in case of India is Government of India itself. And one of the reasons that they say this particular statement is because of the tax dispute cases itself. As per the article, it mentions that over 10 trillion rupees or 10 lakh crore rupees worth of the assets are stuck up because of these particular disputes. And at various levels of judiciary, at various levels of the tribunals, these particular cases are pending and these particular cases are need to be resolved, or there is a need to resolve these particular cases. Longer the time taken, longer will be the assets which are stuck up at the judicial level. Now, in order to address this particular issue of a tax dispute, earlier Government of India had launched two very important schemes which has been mentioned in the article. One, to address the legacy dispute with respect to the indirect taxes and the legacy dispute cases with respect to the direct taxes. The scheme which has been launched in order to address the dispute resolution in case of the indirect taxes is Sabka Vishwas scheme. And as per the article, it mentions that more than 2 lakh cases pending disputes were settled under this particular scheme, and thousands of crores of rupees have been settled, or the disputes worth of thousands of crores has been settled under this particular scheme. And please make a note of this, Sabka Vishwas scheme is related to the tax dispute resolution under the indirect taxes, not the direct taxes. And on the other hand, with respect to the direct taxes, Government of India basically passed Vivad Se Vishwas Act of 2020. And under this particular direct taxes, more than 4.8 lakh cases are pending at various appellate authorities. And as per the article, more than 72,480 crore worth of disputes have been settled under the concept of Vivad Se Vishwas Act of 2020. Now, going beyond this, what is given in the article? Now, the Government of India is basically saying that rather than allowing the disputes to go on for a longer period of time and then bringing a legacy dispute resolution scheme like this, we will install or we will basically set up a dispute resolution mechanism which in real time will be addressing this particular issue of tax dispute resolution. In simple terms, as per the proposal of Government of India, if at all this is set up, then basically the dispute resolution will be done in real time. The pendency of cases will not be happening as it is happening right now. One of the ways that has been mentioned in the article is basically process of a mediation, where a mediator will be appointed who will look into this particular dispute and he will issue an order, or he'll basically make the observation. And the process which has been prescribed as per the article is the taxpayer will be asked to pay whatever is the disputed amount, and there will be no action taken against this particular taxpayer with respect to any kind of a cases being filed on him, with respect to the tax dispute, with respect to the interest waiver. The interest, whatever is applicable on the disputed amount, will be waived off, etc. This is one proposal which has been prescribed in the article. Now, these are some of the very important points which are being discussed in the article with respect to the issue of tax disputes. On the other hand, there is also certain very important points given with respect to advanced pricing agreement. Now, first and foremost, what is this particular idea of an advanced pricing agreement? Now, whenever two companies, let's assume there is an Indian subsidiary of a foreign company, let's say X, and there is another related company of the same foreign company, let's say Y. What I'm trying to say is, let's assume there is a parent company A which is set up, let's say in a foreign such as USA. This particular foreign company owns a subsidiary in India X, and it also owns another subsidiary Y which is set up outside India. Now, if there is a transaction which is happening between X and Y, both are related companies. If a transaction is happening between X and Y, these are transaction between related companies. And whenever such transactions happen between the related companies, there is a fear or there is a concern amongst the governments that there will be practice of transfer pricing. Now, what is this particular idea for transfer pricing? Follow the concept very carefully here. If this particular company X purchases certain goods or services from company Y, it would have paid, let's say, a certain amount of A, B, C. Whatever might be the value, do not worry about it. I'm just saying that X has purchased either a good or a service from a related company and it has paid certain amount A, B, C. Now, if the same good or a service would have been purchased by company X from any other company in the market, that is not related company, then it would have paid an amount which is lesser than A, B, C, which simply means X company, when it is conducting a transaction with a related company, it is basically transferring or making huge amount of a payment or a very high amount of a payment, which will basically lead to lower profits earned by this particular company X within India. And since this particular company X is making a lower profit or earning lower profit in India, it will end up paying lower corporate taxes, or overall taxes to the government of India will be very less. This particular mechanism is called as a transfer pricing. And this practice of a transfer pricing basically comes under a bigger umbrella term which is called as a base erosion and profit shifting, BEPS. Now, follow the argument here. To prevent this kind of a practice of a transfer pricing, respective countries have introduced a concept of a advanced pricing agreement. What is this idea of an advanced pricing agreement? Whenever the related companies are involved in a transaction like this, whenever there's a transaction happening between related companies, basically the pricing of this particular good or a service will be approved by the tax officials of the respective country. For example, in case of India, the tax officials who are involved will be from Central Board of Direct Taxes, who will be involved in approving this particular pricing mechanism. Only once the approval has been provided, once CBDT agrees with this particular pricing mechanism of X and Y, such a transaction between related companies will be allowed. This particular agreement is referred as advanced pricing agreement. And what the finance minister basically has stated and which is mentioned in this particular article is number of advanced pricing agreements which have to be approved, the pendency is increasing and the effectiveness of the advanced pricing agreement needs to be improved or increased. So these are certain very important points which have been discussed in this particular article on tax dispute resolution. Now based on this, I've given a question here. The term transfer pricing often appearing in newspaper refers to pricing mechanism under GST regime? No. Pricing mechanism used to calculate capital gains tax on the sale of the house? No. The pricing of goods and services between two related companies? Yes. Option C is the right option here. The next article is on the renewable energy. Certain very important points mentioned in the article are, first and foremost, Government of India has set up a target of having a renewable energy capacity of 175 gigawatts by 2022. Thereafter, they want to expand this particular capacity to 450 gigawatts by 2030. This is the first point. Second very important point, as of now, though the target is 175 gigawatts, as of now, a total of 70 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity has been installed. Next very important point, if Government of India wants to achieve the target of 175 gigawatts, so totally there has to be a capacity addition of 105 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity in the next couple of years. But very recently, it has been shown that in the next 5 years, not in the next couple of years, but in the next 5 years, a total of 10 gigawatts and 50 gigawatts of wind and solar energy capacity addition will take place. So, though Government of India set up a target of 175 gigawatts by 2022, this article says that in the next 5 years, the total renewable energy capacity addition through wind as well as a solar will be total 60 gigawatts. So basically the article says that this particular target of 175 gigawatts is a very ambitious target set up by Government of India. This is one very important point that has been made in the article. Next very important point. In case of the solar energy, this year, that is basically in the year 2020, the total addition to the capacity has been around 5 gigawatts. And this particular addition in a single year has been the lowest since 2016. Fifth very important point. Basically they are saying that Government of India has asked the DISCOMs to procure 20% of their requirement from renewable energy sources. That is basically if there is a distribution company which requires 100 gigawatts of electricity to supply to the consumers this year, out of this particular 100 gigawatts, 20 gigawatts has to be procured from renewable energy developers. And this particular target of 20% has to be met by these particular DISCOMs by 2021 and 2022. This is the fifth very important point. Sixth very important point. As per one survey, it has been shown that the revenue shortfall for the DISCOMs for this particular financial year is expected to be somewhere around 45,000 crore rupees. And since there is a huge amount of a revenue shortfall for these particular DISCOMs, the article mentions that 1. The Government of India will find it very, very difficult to impose certain conditions on these functionings of the DISCOMs, and moreover these particular DISCOMs basically come under the state governments. And second, since there is a revenue shortfall or there is a concern with respect to revenue earning capacity of these particular DISCOMs may not be able to meet this particular target of procuring 20% of the renewable energy from the renewable energy sources or renewable energy developers. So these are certain very important points which have been mentioned in this particular article titled Optimism on Renewables. Based on this, I've given a question here. I'll elaborate on the question also. With the recent policy changes, the renewable energy capacity targets have been made subservient to the policy changes. Elaborate in 250 words. What do you mean by this particular statement? What do you expect it to write in this particular question? As earlier mentioned, Government of India has set up a very ambitious target of 175 gigawatts of renewable energy by 2022, and they want to further expand it to 450 gigawatts by 2030. This is a target which has been set up by the government. But out of this particular 175 gigawatts itself, 100 gigawatts of capacity is expected to come from solar energy. And within this particular 100 gigawatts, again they have divided this into 60 gigawatts from grid connected solar plants and 40 gigawatts basically from rooftop solar energy. Now, one of the problems with respect to achieving this particular target is the availability of photovoltaic cells or modules. The domestic manufacturing capacity with respect to the demand for these particular photovoltaic cells or modules is very less. And moreover, these particular domestic producers are not very competitive with respect to their technology as well as their pricing. As a result of this particular shortage of supply in the domestic market, India heavily depends on the imports of these particular modules. More than 80% of India's requirement basically is imported from rest of the world. And out of this particular import, majority of these particular imports are done from China. And in the recent times, there has been a lot of dispute or a lot of skirmishes that have happened between India and China. And one of the outcomes of this particular disputes or skirmishes has been that there has been a substantial change or there has been a sudden change in the policy making of Government of India, especially towards trade with China. For example, Government of India very recently made changes with respect to its FDI policy and stated that any FDI that is coming into India from the neighboring countries which share a border with India will have to go through approval route. That was one very important change done by Government of India. Second very important change in terms of policy making is Government of India is now pushing for Atmanirbhar Bharat. Third very important change that has happened in terms of India's trade with China is in terms of imports. Out of these particular imports, I'll focus on the solar imports which are flowing into India from China, that is particularly the photovoltaic modules. Government of India imposed safeguard duties. These particular safeguard duties were imposed for a duration of 2 years, and the main objective of this particular safeguard duty was to basically promote the domestic manufacturing of these particular modules. And over a period of time, we wanted to replace or substitute these particular imports with the domestic supply of these particular modules. And very recently, Government of India has basically expanded the application of these particular safeguard duties by 1 more year. As a result of the imposition of safeguard duties, the imports of these particular solar modules, the cost has increased. And the imports have become costlier. And since the domestic supply is unable to meet the demand, the imports from China have continued to flow into India. So this is basically what they're expecting you to write in this kind of a question. So let me attach it to the question now. With the recent policy changes, the renewable energy capacity targets have been made subservient to the policy changes. What I'm trying to say is this. The Government of India has made changes in terms of having trade relations with China, and these particular policy changes which have been introduced by Government of India are affecting the capability of Indian economy to meet these particular renewable energy targets which have been set up by Government of India itself. So the policy changes which have been introduced by Government of India are making these particular targets subservient to the policy changes. So this is basically what is expected from you with respect to this kind of a question. The next article is with respect to the cabinet giving approval for infusing 6,000 crore rupees into NIIF. Now, before looking at the points given in the article, let's look at certain very important basic points first. First and foremost, NIIF stands for National Investment and Infrastructure Fund. More importantly, this is the first sovereign wealth fund set up by Government of India. What do you mean by this? It simply means this particular fund is owned by Government of India. Second, this has been set up as a Alternative Investment Fund registered under SEBI. Third, a most important role of NIIF is to invest in brownfield projects, greenfield projects which are commercially viable, and stalled projects. Next very important point. Under NIIF, there are 3 types of funds. Again, just remember the basic names, more than sufficient. First one is a master fund, second one fund of funds, and third one strategic fund. Next, NIF is expected to invest in infrastructure projects under water, transportation, energy, housing projects, etc. So these are certain very important basic points with respect to NIIF. Now coming to the importance of this particular article. Earlier, Government of India basically brought out a concept called as National Infrastructure Pipeline, NIP. Under this particular NIP, Government of India basically stated that to develop infrastructure that is required for Indian economy, there is a requirement of investing 111 lakh crore rupees in developing this infrastructure. Out of this particular 111 lakh crore rupees, around 60 to 70 lakh crore rupees worth of debt funds are needed to be invested. Now in this particular regard, this particular decision of Government of India to infuse 6,000 crore rupees into NIF becomes very important. As per the information given in the article, this particular 6,000 crore rupees will not be invested in a lump sum amount or in a single year by Government of India. It has to be done in 2 installments for a simple reason. Right now the financials of Government of India are very tight. There is a lot of financial pressure on Government of India. That is the precise reason the article mentions that out of this particular 6,000 crore rupees, 2,000 crore rupees will be provided in this particular fiscal itself, and remaining 4,000 crore rupees will be infused in the next fiscal. This is one very important point. Next, what is the importance of infusion of this particular amount? That you need to understand. Now, there are certain entities which have been incorporated and which have been set up by NIIF itself. With infusion of this particular amount by Government of India into NIF, it is estimated that NIF sponsored incorporated entities will be able to raise around 1 lakh crore rupees in the form of a debt in the next 5 years. And not only this, with this kind of infusion, it is also estimated that NIF will be able to attract equity investors such as the domestic and global pension and insurance companies. Now, why this point is very important? It is important for a simple reason. Always remember this. The pension and insurance investors are long-term investors in the market. These generally invest for a longer duration. And for development of infrastructure, one of the very important aspect of this is that they require long-term finance. And not only this, the article also mentions that with this kind of infusion by Government of India, NIF is expected to attract investments from other sovereign wealth funds also. These are certain very important points with respect to this particular article. Now, based on this, I have given a question. Consider the following statements regarding NIIF. It is the first sovereign wealth fund of India. Statement is correct. Is an investment vehicle for funding commercially viable greenfield, brownfield projects. Yes. It is registered as an alternative investment fund. Yes. All the 3 statements are true. Right option will be option D. Next article is with respect to LVB and Tier 2 bonds. Now, first and foremost, you need to understand the concept of a Tier 2 bonds, then we'll understand what is given in the article. Now, in case of India, RBI is in the process of implementing Basel III guidelines. What are Basel guidelines? Please understand. These particular Basel guidelines are proposed by BCBS, Basel Committee on Banking Supervision. There has been Basel I guideline, Basel II is there, and the latest one which is being implemented right now is Basel III guidelines. Basically, under the Basel guidelines, the RBI or the central banker of every country will try to implement these particular guidelines in order to protect the health of the banking sector. Now, in case of the Basel III guidelines, the banks are supposed to meet certain capital requirements. in order to meet these particular capital requirements, RBI allowed the banks to issue bonds or debt instruments which were referred to as 81 bonds and 82 bonds. 80 acronym basically stands for additional tier bonds. And if you are wondering about what you mean by this particular term tier, please understand, when there are capital requirements, there is basically a concept of a total capital under the Basel guidelines. And this particular total capital of a bank is calculated by taking into consider tier 1 capital and tier 2 capital. And to meet these particular capital guidelines or capital requirements, RBI has allowed the banks to issue 81 bonds as well as 82 bonds. Now, since there is a discussion with respect to 82 bonds, I'll focus the discussion on this particular concept. Additional tier 2 bonds were issued by LVB Bank, and earlier, because there was a pressure on LVB Bank, or there were certain financial considerations or financial pressures on the functioning of LVB Bank, RBI imposed a moratorium of 1 month over the withdrawals from LVB Bank and announced that LVB Bank will be amalgamated with DBS Bank. In continuation of this, RBI basically asked the LVB Bank to write off 318 crore worth of additional tier 2 bonds which were issued by LVB Bank. Now, what is this particular concept of a 82 bond? Remember this, 82 bonds are issued by the banks, obviously approved by RBI, issued by the banks, and the capital that is collected will be used to meet tier 2 guidelines or tier 2 capital guidelines under the concept of a Basel III guidelines. But more importantly, these particular bonds are unsecured. Unsecured in simply means there is no guarantee with respect to repayment over these particular bonds, and there is no security which is given when the bank will borrow these particular money or borrow the money after issuing the bonds. So these are unsecured bonds, and LVB had issued multiple tranches of these particular 82 bonds which were about to mature between 2024 and 2025. And these particular bonds carried a coupon rate or an interest rate of 10.7% and 11.8%. And very recently LVB, after the direction given by RBI, has announced that they'll be writing off these particular 82 bonds, which simply means the LVB Bank will not be giving back any principal amount or any money for the investors who have purchased additional tier 2 bonds from LVB. That is the basic meaning of the LVB writing of 318 crore worth of additional tier 2 bonds which it had issued. Now, why this particular write-off has been done? As per the guidelines, whenever a bank undergoes an amalgamation under Banking Regulation Act BRA of 1949, in such cases, any liability that the bank has towards its issues of additional tier 2 bonds can be waived off. And RBI has basically stated this in directing LVB to write off these particular value of 82 bonds. So this is the information that has been given in this particular article with respect to LVB and tier 2 bonds. Based on this, I have given a question here. Consider the following statements regarding additional tier 2 bonds are issued by government, proceeds from which are used to recapitalize banks. No, this particular statement is wrong. These are issued by banks, and the proceeds from this are used to meet capital regulatory requirements under Basel guidelines. And beyond this, I've used a statement here, are issued by the government, proceeds from which are used to recapitalize banks. This is basically referring to recapitalization bonds. Remember this particular type of a bond also, recapitalization bonds. Recapitalization bonds have been issued by Government of India in the last couple of years, and the proceeds from this has been used by Government of India to infuse capital in the public sector banks. First statement is wrong. Second, are secured debt instruments? No, these are unsecured debt instruments. Both the statements are false. So right option is option D, both are false. The next article is with respect to GDP contraction. Now, certain very important points with respect to this article are: first, Indian economy contracted by 23.9% in the first quarter of the current fiscal. And following this, various experts had basically estimated that Indian GDP will contract by at least a double digit number or a two digit number even in the following quarter, that is the second quarter. RBI had estimated a contraction of 8.6% for the second quarter. Beating these particular estimates, the Indian economy has contracted by 7.5% in the second quarter of the current fiscal. This is the first very important point. Second point, as it contributed to the growth in the first quarter, even in the second quarter, it has been the agriculture sector which has registered a positive growth rate of 3.4% in the second quarter. Third very important point, manufacturing sector, which had registered a contraction in the first quarter, has rebounded and has registered a positive growth rate of 0.7% in the second quarter. Fourth, the mining, services sector, etc. have continued to contract, or even in the second quarter have registered a negative growth rate, and this is a concerning factor. Next, fifth very important point, Government of India is basically saying that Indian economy is going through a V-shaped recovery now. What do you mean by V-shaped recovery? If this is a time period and this is the growth rate, basically V-shaped recovery generally is represented like this. Suddenly there is a contraction and suddenly there is a recovery to the growth pattern like this. And this kind of a recovery is called as a V-shaped recovery. So Government of India now is saying there is a V-shaped recovery that is happening in the Indian economy. Now, whether Indian economy will enter into positive growth rate, if yes, to what extent will start growing again, you'll have to wait and see. Sixth very important point, in the first quarter, the government expenditure had expanded, or there was a positive growth rate of around 16% that was registered by government expenditure. Whereas in the second quarter, the expenditure from Government of India has actually contracted or actually has reduced. Seventh very important point, since there was a negative growth rate for the first quarter as well as second quarter, India technically has entered into recession. So these are certain very important points which have been mentioned in this particular article with respect to GDP contraction in the second quarter of the current fiscal. The next article is with respect to forex reserves, which has resulted into problems of plenty. Now, what is this particular headline? What does it mean? Let's try and understand this. With the onset of pandemic, Indian economy has faced certain issues. For example, GDP has contracted in the first quarter as well as the second quarter, registering a negative GDP growth rate. The Government of India's finances have gone into disarray. The fiscal deficit of Government of India has increased. On the other hand, the revenues which were supposed to be collected by Government of India have come down. Amongst all of this, one point of solace has been the area of forex reserves. In the recent months, as a result of two very important points. One, the crude oil prices have crashed or have come down. As a result of this, the crude oil imports, the value of this has gone down. In addition to this, the value of imports which are done by India also have gone down. As a result of both of this, the total value of imports into India have come down, which essentially means outflow of dollars has reduced. That's the first very important point. Second very important point is the capital inflows. The FII and FDI inflows have been very strong in the recent months. Yes, initially when the pandemic hit Indian market, there was a surge or an outflow of FII. But in the recent months, again there has been a strong inflow, or there has been a net inflow of FII, and as usual FDI is flowing into Indian economy. As a result of both of this, there is an addition to the forex reserves. In this year itself, there has been a huge surge in the forex reserves which are being maintained by RBI. Now, whenever there is such a sudden surge in the dollar inflow like this, will it always lead to positive outcomes, or there are certain concerns even with respect to this? there are certain concerns with respect to such a sudden huge inflow of dollars like this. Whenever there is a sudden surge of the dollar inflow, Indian rupee will start getting appreciated. It essentially means against a dollar, rupee is becoming stronger. If I want to put it in numbers, just a hypothetical number here, if last month $1 was equivalent to 50 rupees. Today, if $1 is equal to 40 rupees, essentially we are saying that Indian rupee against a dollar has appreciated, dollar has depreciated against rupee. Or else they'll basically use a common statement, rupee is strengthening, rupee has strengthened against a dollar. So what is the problem with rupee strengthening against a dollar? Whenever rupee strengthens against a foreign currency, especially a universal currency such as a dollar, imports will become cheaper, and second, it will affect India's export competitiveness. This has been the issue with respect to the sudden surge in the capital inflows into Indian economy. Now, what is the role of RBI in such a situation? RBI basically intervenes in the forex market and basically conducts a process wherein this particular continuous uncontrolled appreciation of rupee is controlled. That is basically what is happening right now in the market. There is a demand for rupee and there is a supply of dollars. What RBI basically does is exactly opposite. RBI will start demanding dollars and supplying rupees, which will stabilize the exchange rate in the market. Now, please understand, RBI clearly says that role of RBI is not to interfere, not to fix the exchange rate. Rather, RBI says its role is to stabilize the exchange rate whenever such extreme movements of appreciation or depreciation happening in the market or in the forex market. So because of this particular role that RBI basically does, in the last 1 year itself, RBI has been able to shore up huge amount of dollars in its forex reserves. Now, this is one side of the argument. Now, you will basically say it is a good outcome. If RBI is intervening, it is protecting the value of the rupee, then it should be allowed. Foreign countries, especially USA, will look into it and say, if Indian central banker is intervening in the market to such a great extent and India is having a current account surplus now, then there is a danger, there is a fear amongst various experts that India might be labeled as a currency manipulator by USA. That is the first concern with respect to this. Second, there is only a limited time or there is only a limited value up to which RBI can keep on doing all of this particular operation. For a simple reason, if RBI keeps on shoring up the forex reserves like this, it can invest in a market and earn very, very little amount of returns on such amount of investment which is done in terms of a dollar or foreign assets by RBI. Third, right now the concern for RBI is if this continues like this, if RBI keeps on intervening in the market, then the liquidity in the market will increase. And as such, already RBI has infused huge amount of liquidity through various measures within the Indian economy. When the liquidity increases to a very great extent, then there is a concern of inflation rate in the domestic market. And as such, in case of Indian economy, there is already a very high rate of retail inflation, which is more than 7% in the recent months. So these are certain very important points which RBI will keep on facing with respect to its intervention in the forex market. Now, based on this, I have given a question here. Consider the following statements regarding sterilization conducted by RBI. Now, first and foremost, what do you mean by sterilization? It's basically one of the operations or basically a process which is conducted by RBI. Generally, we see that RBI sterilizes whenever there is a huge amount of a capital inflows which is happening into the Indian economy. This particular process of sterilization basically is the process or a method wherein RBI is sucking out the liquidity in the market which has increased because of huge amount of capital inflows. I'll repeat the statement here again. The process of sterilization is conducted by RBI generally when there is a huge amount of a liquidity which is present in the market because of a huge amount of a capital flows which are happening across the border. And whenever RBI wants to suck out the liquidity, it basically can use tools such as CRR, cash reserve ratio, open market operation, or it can issue bonds, stabilization bonds in the market, etc. So based on this, I've given a question here. First statement, intervention done by RBI to suck out the liquidity caused by capital inflows. Yes. Can be done by conducting open market operation, cash reserve ratio, etc. Yes. Both the statements are true. In case of options, there is a small mistake here. Let's assume A is only 1 is true, B is only 2 is true, C is 1 and 2 are true, and 1 and 2 are false. Let's assume these are the options. Okay. So A, B, C and D. So the right option will be option C, 1 and 2 are true. The next important concept or the term that is there in the newspapers is the concept of a prompt corrective action, PCA, which has been there very recently in the newspaper because of the debacle at LVB Bank. Now what is this particular concept of a prompt corrective action? First and foremost, understand this. Prompt corrective action has been introduced by RBI, the regulator of a bank in India, Reserve Bank of India. What is the role of this particular concept of a prompt corrective action? Whenever the performance of the banks will enter into certain gray area or let's say into troubled areas as defined by RBI, which are these particular areas, I'll tell you in a minute. Then RBI will keep this particular bank under observation. Is it okay? I'll repeat the statement again. Whenever the performance of the bank will run into troubled areas or into certain troubled parameters, RBI will keep this particular bank under observation, and not just keeping it under observation, RBI will impose certain restrictions. This particular process is called as a prompt corrective action. So on what parameters RBI will decide this particular bank is in trouble? Three very important parameters that RBI will use are: 1. Capital adequacy ratio, CAR, or credit to risk weighted assets ratio, CRAR. Second one is NPA, non-performing asset, that is basically a measure of a quality of the assets in the banking sector. And the third one is return over assets. ROA stands for return over assets or return on assets, which is basically a measure of profitability. So in terms of these three parameters, RBI will keep on evaluating the function of these particular banks. And whenever the bank will cross these particular certain thresholds, these particular banks will be kept under the prompt corrective action. And once they are brought under prompt corrective action, certain impositions, certain restrictions will be imposed by RBI. What are those? We'll have a look at it in just a minute. But essentially, under the capital adequacy ratio, just understand this, higher the capital adequacy ratio, more the stability in the bank. I'll repeat the statement here. Higher the capital adequacy ratio, more the stability in the bank. Basically, capital adequacy ratio is maintained by the banks to absorb certain losses that these particular banks will incur because they are involved in the lending. So as per the Basel guidelines, every bank is supposed to maintain certain minimum amount of a capital adequacy ratio. So higher the CAR, lower will be the issue, lower will be the trouble in the bank, more the stability in the bank. As the CAR, that is a capital adequacy ratio, keeps on falling down, keeps on declining like this, more will be issues in the functioning of a bank. And when the capital adequacy ratio keeps on declining and the concern of RBI keeps on increasing, RBI will keep on shifting the classification of the bank under the prompt corrective action. There are three buckets or three classifications here: risk threshold 1, threshold 2 and threshold 3. As the risk with respect to performance of the bank increases, the classification will also keep on increasing. As already mentioned, higher the capital adequacy ratio, more the stability, more the strength for a bank. Lower the capital adequacy ratio, more the concern over the functioning of this particular bank. So have a look at this. If the risk threshold 1 is used, it basically means under capital adequacy ratio, its capital adequacy ratio has fallen below 7.75% and is higher than 5.125%. Basically, it is between 5.125 to 7.75%. And if it falls below 5.125% up to 3.625%, so obviously lower capital adequacy ratio, more risk. So classification will be shifted to RT2, that is risk threshold 2. And if it falls below 3.625%, then the bank will be classified under the risk threshold 3. Same thing with respect to NPA. Higher the NPA, more the risk associated with the bank. The bank is entering into more and more troubled waters. That is a simple meaning. So when the NPA is between 6 to 9%, you will be kept under threshold 1 category. If it is more than 9% up to 12%, then threshold 2. Then if it is more than 12%, you will be kept under the risk threshold 3 category. In terms of profitability, if the profitability, that is return on assets, is negative for 2 consecutive years, it is a first category. It is for consecutive 3 years negative, then the category of risk threshold 2. And if it is continuously negative for 4 consecutive years, then you will be classified under risk threshold 3. Now what will happen if you are kept under RT1, RT2 or RT3? What will happen? Basically RBI says whenever the classification keeps on increasing, the actions that will be imposed on the bank will also keep on increasing. For example, if you are kept under the first category, that is risk threshold 1, then the issue of dividends, there will be certain restrictions on this. Remittances of profits, certain restrictions will be imposed by RBI. And as the classification keeps on increasing, there is a risk of the bank keeps on increasing, or risk associated to the bank keeps on increasing, the restrictions imposed by RBI will also keep on increasing. These are mandatory actions. And in addition to mandatory actions, RBI can even impose discretionary actions also. So in addition to this, RBI might choose any or many of these particular actions with respect to this particular bank which has been classified under prompt corrective action. And this was there in the newspaper because LVB was kept under prompt corrective action before the amalgamation was announced by RBI. So these are certain very important points, the articles as well as the questions related to this particular week. Thank you. Have a good day.